Hello and welcome. I'm Amritanshu Rai and you're watching Law of the Land on Raj Sabha TV. Today we bring to you the Electronic Delivery of Services Bill 2011, which seeks to bring government services to people's doorsteps. To discuss the issue, I have with me Mr. S.P. Gulati, former Secretary, Department of Post, and J. Sai Deepak, Advocate. Now for the headlines. The bill creates a legal framework for delivery of government certificates, licenses and receipts at the doorsteps of consumers. The bill seeks to provide, as far as possible, all public services in electronic format. Responsibility of timely delivery will be on the point person in the concerned department, and any default on his part will attract penalties up to 20,000 rupees. Issue of certificates from schools and colleges, receipts and payments of money, transactions in banks will be at your doorsteps if the proposed Electronic Delivery of Services Bill becomes an act. The bill seeks to provide delivery of all public services in electronic format.
There is a constant complaint by the citizens of delayed response in dealing with government services like licenses, birth and death certificates, and several other government certificates. In order to provide relief, the government proposes to set up a legal framework for providing electronic delivery of services. The Electronic Delivery of Services Bill seeks to provide electronic-based services to all citizens. Government departments will have to adopt the timely delivery mechanisms suggested in the bill and will have to upgrade their distribution systems to meet the standards.
Considering that everything is available for people to see if at all they want to, instead of going through ledgers that can be fudged, instead of going through hard records that can be torn and done whatever, we know what happens. I think there is, at least on paper, there is scope for elimination of corruption, provided of course that all norms of due diligence and storage of information that is there in the Information Technology Act is followed even here.
The EDS bill seeks to establish a Central Electronic Delivery Commission at center and state commissions in states. The commission will monitor the activities in all electronic delivery systems. The commission will provide frameworks for the government departments to ensure timely delivery of services. The Commission will have the powers to recommend central government relating to delivery of electronic services. The Commission will have to maintain records of delivery systems and will prepare an annual report on efficiency of state and central electronic commissions.
According to me, a revolutionary bill. It tries to do away with the interface that the public servant has with the public, and by doing away with that interface, it does possibly two things. One is speeds up the delivery of services, and two, it does away with corruption. It's not an anti-corruption bill as such, but it tries to make systemic changes which should do away with corruption.
Migration of manual-based delivery of public services to electronic mode needs acceleration in terms of efficiency and outcome. To deliver this, government is trying to introduce a new bill called Electronic Delivery of Services to strengthen the delivery of public services. The idea of the bill is to reduce the interface of public with government officials and save time and money of the citizens. The proposed law is expected to enhance transparency in the delivery of such services and also reduce corruption.
Once the bill becomes an act, it will promote or likely to promote e-commerce. The point to you, Mr. Gulati. Yes. First of all, it says a lot of infrastructure needs to be created. A lot of computerization will have to take place, which will be in the domain of the government, which means computers right down to the block level, to the district level, to the state level, and center, obviously. Do you think it's implementable, especially the view that most of our districts still do not have power?
Where power is concerned, it's a minor item because one can always use solar power and other means. But the main thing is, while implementing it, will it reach the public? Because public has to have easy access to this service provider. I'm presuming there will be a service provider everywhere. This is the most important aspect of any government venture. It has to reach the beneficiaries. Now here the beneficiary is any member of the public. Our total population is the beneficiary of what this bill is trying to do. Now if it has to reach everybody, we have to have a very large infrastructure on the face of it to ensure that even a villager can have access to this information as well as access to what he is wanting, which may be a license, which may be anything.
Also in so many other languages.
And also in so many other languages, as you rightly say. Of course, language again is something which can be covered up, because now on internet languages can be translated, it can be given. The basic infrastructure not only has to have regulations, I mean it has to be a regulated infrastructure, it has to have efficiency. Now, normally government finds it difficult, I mean you want lakhs of centers of this type. How are you going to ensure that they work efficiently? Because you may create any rule, it has to be efficiently managed. We don't want to have a bill which is not going to create the exact infrastructure to ensure that it is successful.
Bringing in Jay Sai, Deepak, the point here is the bill is obviously trying to bring services to the doorsteps of the people. Right. But there are already several existing laws relating to this kind of a domain. This is a unique bill, no doubt.
Right.
But does it come into conflict with the existing other legal frameworks?
Honestly speaking, I don't see it as contravening or being at loggerheads with the existing legal framework at all. In fact, it only complements the existing legal framework. Because if you look at the statement of objects and reasons of this bill, it is very clear in its approach. The first thing is it tells you that you have a Right to Information Act, which tells you what are the kinds of information that you are eligible to have access to or entitled to have access to. Second, you have the Information Technology Act, which legalizes online transactions. Now, what is missing here is a government-sponsored or a government-undertaken mechanism or a framework which ensures that you have means of taking up these or undertaking these transactions as well. So as far as I am concerned, this fits well with the existing framework. There is no contravention at all. Mm-hmm. And even otherwise, this bill goes on to say that this bill shall be implemented and interpreted insofar as it does not contravene or come into conflict with existing laws. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a perfectly legitimate piece of legislation.
On the implementation side, obviously you're on the legal side, but on the implementation side, the points made by Mr. Gulati, do you think that's relevant?
I think they're absolutely relevant, but honestly speaking, infrastructure in this country is always an issue with respect to any kind of project that you undertake. So that should not be a stumbling block that should come in the way of implementation of this kind of a legislation. And to be honest, it's not as if this is the first kind of system that is envisaged in this country. There is already a precursor to this. In Tamil Nadu, you already have it. In the state of Andhra Pradesh, E-Seva Kendras have been there for what? Since the regime of Mr. Chandrababu Naidu. That is since 1996. So it's not as if this is happening for the first time. And mind you, E-Seva Kendras in Andhra Pradesh were not restricted only to the major cities. They managed to percolate to the bottommost rung of the ladder as well. Okay. So it's not that it is not possible. But one thing that you should bear in mind is implementation of this nature and at such scale requires decentralization of implementation, which is exactly why you have a state commission here and a central commission here. And the state commission will oversee what happens in that particular state. So long as this particular boundary is decently maintained and there is a certain amount of demarcation as to what the center will do and what the state will do, I think it's perfectly possible.
You've been Secretary, Department of Post. Yes. The existing system, the way we operate, do you think this framework or this kind of existing system, Department of Post which offers several services like this, right up to issuing certificates, NSC certificates to post, almost all services. Now it will soon graduate to being a bank also, hopefully.
Quite. It is a bank.
Now, it is already servicing rural areas as bank. The existing way the Department of Post is functioning, and after this bill comes, do you see it integrating well, or do you see a conflict there?
I don't see a conflict at all. It's the other way around. It integrates perfectly with the concept. You see, we have over 160,000 post offices in the country. And out of them, about 150,000 are in the rural areas. Now, the basic feature is that we have 6.5 lakh villages in the country. So every fourth village is a post office. Now, if you have villages like that, then there is already an infrastructure which is already there. It's well established.
What about the training aspect?
Training, even otherwise, you have to give training. It's not difficult to train. If you are going to set up, you still will have to train the people.
So the existing staff gets training or you get trained staff?
No, we either add the trained staff to the infrastructure already there, or the existing staff can be trained if they are young enough to understand it. After all, the post office, 20 years back, in 1992, we got through the planning commission, our computerization, which is ages back now.
Right.
And our postal people, we have developed our own infrastructure. We have developed our own software.
On that note, sir, it's time for us to head into a break. When we come back, we will talk about the accountability fixed on government officers and the action contemplated in case of default.
कथक नृत्य का जाना पहचाना नाम मिलिए शख्सियत में उमा शर्मा से सिर्फ राज्यसभा टीवी पर।
Welcome back. Under the proposed bill, the responsibility of timely delivery will be on the departments, and there will be penalties up to 20,000 rupees in case of delay on part of the concerned officer. The Commission also has the powers to remove the concerned official if he is found violating the law.
The bill proposes severe fines and punishments for the officer who will be responsible for electronic delivery of services. There will be a prescribed timeline for each service that the government departments will have to formulate. Once that is done, a default on the part of the officer will attract action. The Commission will spend money in training and maintaining equipment. Under the bill, the central government will provide money for central commission and state will have to bear the cost of state commissions.
Well, accountability is something that will only bring more transparency. This bill definitely will bring in more transparency, because if there is a penal sanction of the imposition of a fine, as this bill proposes, I'm sure it has some deterrent effect, and any kind of lapses or negligence or carelessness on the part of public servants could be avoided.
In order to provide continuous delivery of services, the central government will create a common core and support infrastructure consisting of statewide area networks, data centers, service centers, and electronic service delivery gateways. Government will also be laying down standards and policy guidelines to ensure sharing of information, seamless transfer of data, and e-governance applications. The bill proposes penalties up to ₹5,000 or officials if they fail to adhere to the norms. In case of persistent default, the penalty may extend to ₹20,000. The Commission also has the powers to remove or suspend the concerned officer if he is found violating the law.
Now, before you can have electronic delivery of registration of, for example, say deeds, etc., you need to have a prior step of digitization of all the information that the government has. Not only do you need to digitize, you have to have it in a form which is accessible to people. It's only after all this is done that you can move to the next stage, which is delivery of services.
The National E-Governance Plan, approved by the government in May 2006, speaks about providing all government services access to the common man in his locality through common service delivery outlets of affordable cost. The proposed electronic delivery of services bill seeks to achieve this goal. Raj Kamal, Rajya Sabha TV.
Will the government officers responsible for services like the accountability clause in the bill? Will the government officers like this? The accountability clauses. They'll be now held responsible and will be severely penalized from 5,000 to 20,000, and if they default or don't, if there is a violation, the Commission is even going to suspend or remove them.
Right.
Government officers.
Obviously, the Babudam is not going to like this, but then that is something they have to live with. Let me just give you an example to show you why this is very important. about 44,000 files were lost by the trademark registry in Mumbai. And this is because although digitization has been in place for quite some time, they have not digitized those records. Now these records pertain to people who own the rights. Practically they are title deeds. They are basically documents which show whether the title was granted, who is the current owner of the particular title. 44,000 files were lost, and even this was reported in a case in the Delhi High Court. Now, when 44,000 files are lost and there is no sanction at the end of the day which tells people who are responsible for this that if you don't do what you're expected to do, then there is a whip that is waiting to crack at you. I think then there is no, just as we need incentive, there must also be a sanction for whatever we do. And I think this is absolutely necessary. In fact, I would go to the extent of saying that the quantity of fines that have been proposed in this are actually less.
Mr. Gulati, how are you going to avoid this? There's got to be a way to get out of this clause. How do you think? What are the ways?
I think it's difficult to avoid. And I think it's imperative that such clauses should be there. The point at issue is you are paid a certain amount of money to do a certain job. If you perform your job, you are supposed to then do it within a time limit. You can't just sleep over a file. And that is what leads to problems. The entire problem is when you delay a case, the individual concerned wants it to be done immediately, and he uses all sorts of other means which you capitalize on if you are interested in it.
But that's a contemporary idea. Mr. Gulati, that's a contemporary idea that if you're paid, you deliver and you give services.
Quite.
But with the government officers, it's been the opposite. The trend has been that you get paid,
And
you
still-
have a certain amount of security. Even if you don't deliver, the government gives you the security of your job.
No.
Now, given these factors and a new accountability clause like this, how is it going to happen?
They have to do it. They have to obey the orders. Otherwise, they'll be penalized. It's simple. They are paid to do that job. Today, they are not doing it. And as I said, they expect sometimes, some of them at least, otherwise we wouldn't be having these thousands of cases. They expect the public to pay to get their legitimate job done.
It's as easy as
They
as
don't
easy
have
as
a
that.
choice. If they join government service, they are well paid. They seem to have had an easy time all these years, some of them at least. Now let them perform. Why not?
on the delivery bit. Yeah, you were making a point. Yes.
If I could actually add to his point, what he says is perfectly sensible, because we wouldn't have come to the stage had there been a system that was completely reliable, transparent and accountable. We would have been simply talking about digitization of records. But today it is not just about digitization of records, it's also about delivery. It's about a certain amount of faith that can be reposed in the system by the man on the street, by the average Joe on the street. So I think it's absolutely necessary. See, as far as delivery is concerned, the only lacuna as far as this legislation is that there is a level of specificity that it does not get down to. For instance, it's not just about, let's say, transactions. It is also with respect to adherence of that particular transaction in accordance with the timeline that is there in the parent legislation that governs the transaction.
Yes.
And that is something that the bill has to address. And if there is no, let's say, system of, I don't say that for everything there must be a penalty, but let there be a certain amount of sanction that awaits a particular government officer. See, on the issue of even penalties, I'll just add this point and I'll conclude it with that. It is not for everything and anything that the government officer will be held liable. So long as you follow the due process, so long as you're within the bounds of the law, and so long as you do what you're expected to do, there is no amount of liability that can be imputed or attached to you. Only when you contravene it, and there is a certain amount of bad faith that is reflected on the face of it, that is when you attract it. So as long as you have nothing to hide and you've got nothing to fear, and you've done what you're expected to do, what are you afraid of?
It's time for us to head into a break. When we come back, we will show you an interview with senior advocate Pawan Duggal.
शनिवार सिर्फ राज्यसभा टीवी पर।
Welcome back. My colleague Raj Kamal spoke to Senior Advocate Pawan Duggal and tried to understand how far this bill will help in delivering electronic services.
Is there a need for a separate bill only for the digitization of delivery of services? Can't we amend the earlier IT Act?
We already have a mother legislation in place governing the use of computers, computer systems, computer networks, computer resources, communication devices, as also use of data and information in the electronic form. This is the Indian Cyber Law, the Information Technology Act 2000. And mind you, by virtue of Section 81 of the IT Act, the provisions of this law shall have all superseding impact over anything inconsistent therewith contained in any other law for the time being in force.
Electronic identification of a person or a community or a place is must for the execution of this bill. Do we have enough technical facilities for the identification of the real identity of the person?
Identification of the target audience. Well, you have the IT Act, which is silent on this. The EDS bill is silent on this. If you would want, you could potentially start with the Aadhaar number holders to begin with, but that itself is running from an inherent risk.
Many of our Indian states are infrastructurally poor. Then how can the government implement this bill in a state level?
I think we should not legislate any legislations which are going to be paper tigers. The EDS bill, even if it's passed in the current format, is likely to be a mere paper tiger, primarily because of the huge dichotomy in which the bureaucratic structure of the country works. You have to realize that assuming you have this law in place and you have the central and the state commissions under this law, at the end of the day, the delivery of the relevant governmental services in the electronic format is not going to be done by these commissions, but is going to be done by the relevant governmental departments and ministries, most of whom do not share information with each other. So we are going in a direction where different departments of the government could be working in silos.
We will have to wait and see the change that may be introduced in the Parliament. The point to you, Mr. Gulati, you were trying to tell us about the timeline issues. There is no definition of what the timeline is going to be, and since the departments will have to formulate their own timelines, they are likely to propose a timeline that is convenient to them and may not be as convenient to the citizens.
That is something which will have to be looked into, because you are 100% correct. No department is going to, or at least no departmental person is going to put his head in the noose by projecting a timeline which is restrictive, or let's say even realistic. He would like to have a very broad timeline where he can wriggle out of it. That has to be stopped. The timeline, well, the list of the services can be made broadly by each department, and it can be thrown open to the public to suggest, and also to the experts, and some via media between the two can be found. It should not be totally unrealistic that you take 6 months or 3 months or even 20 days.
They're bringing in, Jai Sai Deepak, the timeline issue. See, all has been said. See, the departments will have to formulate it. Now, it has to be realistic. Second, the bill as it stands can't legislate and can't specify timelines because it is going to vary from department to department.
Correct.
So what's the way out?
See, as far as that is concerned, we should understand two things. The bill only gives a timeline for electronic implementation of the transactions, whereas the transactions themselves are governed by individual laws that govern those particular transactions. See, I really wouldn't want to interfere with the existing laws as far as the timelines are concerned, because they're more than sufficient, at least on paper. The only thing that this bill needs to address is that it has to say that the timelines that have been stipulated or have been laid down in the laws that govern the transactions must be adhered to, and their adherence must be reflected on the systems that are implemented as part of this particular legislation.
Okay.
That is very important.
That is what you would
Exactly.
should come into the
Exactly. If something has to be done within 180 days, it must show how many days did it take for them to do it.
Also, a point, Mr. Gulati, about the infrastructure that you were trying to make in the rural infrastructure that the Department of Post has. How is that going to help the implementation of this bill?
You see, we have our rural post offices at a distance of 3 kilometers from each other. Broadly speaking, these are the parameters, and we have achieved it by and large in the country. There may be a few odd exceptions, but basically we have achieved it. Now, that means that if there are 2 post offices and they have 7 villages around them which do not have a post office, the maximum distance between the 2 of them will be less than 3 kilometers. That the individual living in any one of these villages can approach one or the other post office, and it will be about 1.5 kilometers on an
From their
average.
village.
From-
Yeah, I'll bring in Jason. The last point that you wanted to make
Was with respect to liability of the service providers.
Yes, yes.
See, this particular bill also refers to assisted access. And assisted access means access to these services using some kind of assistance from third-party service providers. Now, these service providers can be of 2 kinds. One, people who set up the infrastructure and who handle the infrastructure on behalf of the government. 2, people who train the users of this particular infrastructure. Now, the second category is not something that I am particularly concerned about. It's about the first people. These people would be the ones who would be stepping in the shoes of the government to do what the government is otherwise supposed to do as its sovereign function. So just as a certain amount of responsibility is there on these service providers under the Right to Information Act, there must be similar provisions which also say that a service provider who performs the governmental functions on behalf of the government must also bear a certain amount of responsibility or a certain amount of liability if he is seen violating or contravening any provision of any law that is applicable for the transaction.
That's all we have time for. Thank you, sir, for joining us on this discussion. It is time for us to end the show. You can email your suggestions and comments to law.rstv@gmail.com. You can also watch our shows on the YouTube. We will be back with a new issue and a new episode. Keep watching Rajya Sabha TV.